also webcam, also dance, and any legislation that affects one group of us often will affect all of us.
I imagine I'll have a lot of people saying, you've not spoken to anyone who's really representative of the industry. But I guess something that I've been finding is that the impression I get is that it's so diverse that nobody could really be like the one perfect representative of it. Who do you see leading discussions about sex work, and whose voices would you like to see amplified more?
Largely, I see discussions about sex work, at least in the public eye, being led by white feminist celebrities who are interested in stopping sex trafficking. There's very little public discourse about sex work as labor rights at all. Lately, that's been changing. I've been so excited to see the word SWERF entering popular usage in leftist spaces. SWERF is a sex work excluding radical feminist. That is a very, very recent term. And it has only been in the past few years that I have seen non-sex workers proudly stand up for sex work as valid labor.
Some sex workers play the game because they enjoy it, but a lot do it because they need the money, and the deck is very much stacked against them. In England, it is legal to buy and sell sex, but if you do it in a flat with somebody else, that's technically brothel keeping, which is still illegal. If you do it outdoors, you might be charged with solicitation, which is still illegal. If you advertise, depending on where you do it, that might be illegal. If you help a sex worker book gigs because they can't use a phone, if you borrow money from a sex worker, if you're a driver or a bodyguard for a sex worker, then you are profiting from somebody else's sex work, and technically that's pimping, which is still illegal. So if you need the money, how much are you willing to gamble? Because working in a flat with somebody else will be safer, but it's against the law. It'd be great to have a security guard, but technically it's illegal. If you are working outdoors, you're going to want to talk to clients about prices and condom use before you get in a stranger's car. But better hurry up, because if you get spotted, you could be charged with solicitation or hit with a prostitute's caution, which will show up on a background check. And we're not done playing yet. In Northern Ireland, it is legal to sell sex and criminal to buy it. But because that transaction is a crime, if I utter the magic words Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, all your money can disappear. If the police suspect, not prove, suspect, that you got that money selling sex. And it's illegal to rent a flat to a sex worker, because profiting from somebody else's sex work is pimping. So if you are caught selling sex in Northern Ireland, you face a potentially unlimited fine and eviction from your home, all without trial, for doing something that is completely legal. I think some of us have this image of being arrested, where it's a gentle knock on the door and they say, "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Thorne. We've just seen some of your tweets from 2007. I'm afraid you're going to have to come with us." And then they lead me away stoically, whilst my wife cries softly on the doorstep and wonders just how many more dark secrets this quiet coastal town can hold. When in fact, if you've ever even come close to being arrested, you'll know it's a humiliating, unpleasant, and often quite painful experience. As research for this episode, I put out a call on Twitter asking sex workers all over the world to share their stories.
Several officers who had been watching the building for a few hours and presumably knew that I had no clients in, just workers and management, burst in, held me against a wall, separated all the workers, and basically terrified everyone. All of our details were taken down so immigration checks could be done, which now means we're all on record with the police as prostitutes. They then sat us down and informed us that the whole thing was a welfare check that was carried out for our benefit, which is ironic, given that if they had decided we were trafficking victims, then we would have been put into immigration detention. My friends had iPhones, laptops, and cash savings wrongly confiscated under the Proceeds of Crime Act, several of which still haven't been returned. The Metropolitan Police invited press photographers to the raids and purposefully did not let people get dressed before they were taken into custody. I'm still scared I'll come up in some of those photos and be outed at my day job. Several friends were taken from custody to immigration proceedings.
There's an unspoken assumption, I think, that arrest, imprisonment, or threatening somebody with those things is morally neutral, but I would invite you to consider those things as forms of violence. When somebody is arrested or detained, they are harmed by that. And so the question, is this harm justified, which it might be, is always going to be worth asking. In England, solicitation and advertising are summary offences, meaning they don't have to prove it in court. If the cops say you've done it, then that's enough, which is supposed to streamline things, but obviously gives the police a lot of power. Often whether or not you get punished is at the officer's discretion, which can be questionable when it comes to sex workers. In the US, full-service sex work is criminalised almost everywhere, and in several major cities, you can be arrested for intent to commit prostitution if they find that you're carrying condoms. That's enough. Sometimes, depending on who you are. I was actually in New York recently, and carrying condoms, and I'm not even American. But they're not going to profile me as a sex worker and stop and search me, are they? I could have walked up and slapped de Blasio on the ass and then they'd gone, "Hey, I love this guy! You want a free hot dog? You want to hold my gun?" In her book, Playing the Whore, journalist and former sex worker Melissa Grant notes that since the 70s and earlier, many sex workers have consistently identified the police, not clients, as the major source of violence in their lives, which has led some thinkers to suggest that there might be some kind of trick going on here. Some people on the receiving end of this violence have said, it doesn't feel like you're arresting me for solicitation, because walking around with condoms is legal after all. It feels like you're profiling me and arresting me for being trans. It doesn't feel like these laws are there to protect people, because they clearly don't. It feels like you just want to see a lady disappear. So I guess this kind of leads us quite nearly onto decriminalisation. Like, what is it to you? What is it to the people that you work for and with? And I see a lot of people conflating it with legalisation as well.
Decriminalisation would allow sex workers to operate without fear of arrest, but relatively independently and without a lot of infrastructure. Whereas legalization would probably require a lot of licensing, maybe specific venues, and tends to lead to sort of a brothel system.
And I've heard from some people that legalization can create like a two-tier system where if you don't have the money to like afford the license or the right like ways in which that, if you can't jump through the hoops for whatever reason, then you're kind of still criminalized.
Right. So the most marginalized people could still be criminalized under legalization if they can't afford all of those licenses and fees. Or the most marginalized would be forced to work for some guy who had the money to own a brothel and pay for all their licensing in exchange for them to be under his thumb, which I don't like. I think the biggest goal of all of the sex worker organizations I talk to is the full decriminalization of full-service sex work. And that's not just of selling sex itself. It's of buying sex. It's of helping people who are selling sex. It's of creating homes where you can work cooperatively and sell sex. Because I understand in the UK, the selling of sex itself isn't the problem, but all of the parallel activities are still criminalized, which leads to workers still living under this kind of threat of constant police violence. You're still forced into a black market situation, which is always more unsafe for labor. Decriminalization puts the power in the hands of the workers and in the hands of labor, and legalization in many cases requires you to have some wealthy capitalist who can pay for all of your licenses and the legalized brothel, who is going to take a large percentage of your money and control the way in which you move through the world.
Because it's supposed to keep people safer, decriminalisation is supported by Amnesty International and the World Health Organization. And if that's the name of the game, then it makes sense to look at New Zealand, where sex work has been decriminalised since 2003, mostly. I say mostly because it's still illegal for migrants to sell sex there, whether documented or not. So all that violence we talked about, the raids and the deportations without trial, is still going on, just targeted mainly at sex workers of colour. Despite some people worrying that decriminalisation would increase the number of sex workers in New Zealand, it isn't clear that that's happened. We'll come back to that at the very end. For our philosophical purposes, though, if you think that more sex workers is intrinsically